Going to go ahead and call this meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order for August 15th, 2022. Thanks everyone for attending both in person as well as remotely via WebEx. Just for the record, I'd like it to reflect that Councilors Quinnell and Caltabiano are absent and excused this evening. And before we start with our Pledge of Allegiance, I would just like to take a brief moment of silence in memory of Missoula Mayor John Engen this evening, who passed away this morning, surrounded by his family. And as many of you know, John served for over 17 years down in the city of Missoula, not only in the capacity that I serve in, but also the capacity of Dana Smith. It's a different form of government, and he certainly led Missoula through some challenging times, much as our city manager has here, Dana. And I particularly look at his success in securing the city of Missoula's water utility and all the work that he did to elevate Missoula from what was a fairly small town to a very thriving city. So let's please take a moment of silence. Thanks very much. We will move on to our Pledge of Allegiance. Brian, do you mind leading us this evening? We do have a fairly packed agenda this evening, just so you're aware, as you can see from the agenda. But we'll start with communications from the public, and this is your opportunity to discuss anything or actually just share anything you'd like with the City Council that are not items that are advertised for a public hearing this evening. So any comments are welcome at this time, and for the record, your name and address when you approach the podium. Any public comment tonight? Not seeing any, I'll close the public comment period. And anyone online, Michelle? Thank you.
For those of you who are attending via WebEx, if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand with the icon down at the bottom of your screen. I think we're good.
Thank you, Michelle. Any volunteer board reports from the audience? How about the council? Rebecca?
The Strategic Housing Committee is going through a process called Refresh, where we're reviewing the housing needs assessment with our consultants. And so we're getting data about where we're at, and it's a little depressing, but also kind of exciting to see how well we've done in town. I would encourage okay, I better not say anything more because I'm supposed to be enthusiastic about where we're at. Anyways, we're getting that done. So that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. We'll move on to our consent agenda. You do have the minutes from the July 18th meeting enclosed in your packet. Can I have a motion, please?
I would move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously, which brings us quickly to our public hearings this evening. And again, just for the audience, if you do have comments to share this evening, I will be trying to limit public comment to about 3 minutes, given the length of our meeting this evening. With that said, we'll start with item 6A, which is resolution number 22-15, a resolution amending our 2022 fiscal year annual budget to increase appropriations in 3 funds of the city. Dana.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. In your packet on page 46 is my staff report regarding the fiscal year 2022 budget amendments. There are 3 budget amendments that need to be processed. One is for $670,000 in our resort tax fund. We collected significantly higher resort taxes during fiscal year 22 than anticipated, and therefore we had to transfer a portion of those funds to the water fund for the Haskell Basin Conservation Easement in accordance with the bond that is outstanding. As well as we did have some additional costs for the Edgewood and Texas street reconstruction project that were incurred in fiscal year '22. We also have the Whitefish Trail Construction Fund. Again, this has to do with just timing of construction of the Holbrook Trail system. And that budget amendment is recommended at $50,000. And then the Solid Waste Fund, we had unanticipated revenues. As you know, we've recently taken over the billing, so last year's budget was an estimate, but now that we're seeing our actual costs, we do know that of the $91,000 roughly that we collected over budget, we also needed to remit those funds to Republic Services for their cost of providing the garbage service. So with that, staff respectfully recommends that the City Council approve the proposed resolution amending the fiscal year 2022 annual budget.
Thank you, Dana. Any questions for Dana on this line item? Any public comment this evening? We'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Michelle, anyone online? I don't see any hands raised on this matter. Typically, we don't have any comments on our budgets. So with that said, I'll close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion, please.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve resolution number 22-15. I think I'm starting with the right number there.
Correct. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry unanimously, which brings us on to item 6B of our agenda, which is our fiscal year 2023 budget, tax levy, and assessments public hearing. We're going to roll the resolutions as well as, well, all of the resolutions for that matter, into one presentation from staff as well as one public hearing. We'll start with Resolution 22-16, a resolution accepting and approving the municipal budget for the City of Whitefish for the 2023 fiscal year commencing July 1st, 2022 in its final form, as well as resolutions number 16, all the way through 25, 17 through 25 being our levies and assessments. Dana.
Good evening again. With the fiscal year 2023 year started July 1st, we have actually over the past few months held 2 work sessions and a public hearing for the preliminary budget, but we have now received the final numbers from the state of Montana for our taxable value, which is necessary to complete our mill levy. So we received our taxable value on August 1st. It was an increase of 4.51% over the prior year. We had estimated 4% internally. The FY23 budget reduces total mills levied by 17.20 mills, which is a 14.72% decrease in property tax revenue that will be collected by the city. Our ability to actually reduce taxes this year is because of the significant increase in the property tax relief from resort tax collections, as well as we had higher than expected fund balances at the start of the year. Resort taxes collected in excess of the budget must be returned to taxpayers as additional property tax relief. And just so you can understand how significant that is, for fiscal year 23, we actually reduced mills by an additional 23.20 mills compared to last year. And we are having some other adjustments to our millages actually. So we do offset that 23.2 mills with a 6.25 mill increase in the city's general levy. And that includes 4 mills for affordable housing initiatives. And then we have a 0.25 mil decrease in our permissive group health levy. That's really due to our vacancies and positions affecting how we can calculate and levy for our health insurance, group health insurance programs. So this year we are facing a consumer price index rate of 7.1%. The fiscal year 23 budget does keep other assessments, maintenance assessments, for the residential and commercial lighting districts, as well as the stormwater maintenance district flat for a 3rd year in a row. The assessments for the street maintenance district and parks and greenway maintenance district do include a 4% rate increase. The proposed changes above, for example, for a residential property with no new improvements in this past calendar year, and a market value of about $440,000, which on Zillow is actually $916,000. So you can tell the difference between the market value of our currently assessed properties that aren't reappraised until next year and what we're seeing in the market. But they'll see an annual savings of about $93.91. Now, a home's value dictates how much tax that they're going to pay. Keep in mind, our mills are levied on the taxable value of any home residential property at about 1.35% of the market value. So that's where the taxable value comes in at. Resort taxes, as I mentioned, we had a significant increase in the amount that we collected. It's the highest collection rate that we've seen since its inception. It was about 32% higher than the prior year. Now that, obviously, we've had a strong visitation, but what that really is lending to is inflation and the rapidly rising prices that we've seen. We actually saw an increase in the amount of property tax relief we were able to return to taxpayers. It was $1.2 million, and so we've rebated $2.8 million this year. So resort tax is definitely working in our favor right now. That said, though, I think it's very important that we keep in mind that this year is not a sustainable growth or one that we've seen in the past. We average generally around 5 to 6% growth in our resort tax. And so for future years, we're going to have to be very careful in how we plan the use of cash reserves to slowly increase our mill levy again to adjust for that tax relief going away at the full amount of $1.2 million. Probably right now, the budget estimates about $400,000 that we'll actually see in excess property tax relief, just with how significant that growth was over this 1 year. So all great things from the property tax side. Fund balance and cash reserves for all of our funds are looking great. We are at 43.74% of total budgeted expenditures in our property tax supported funds. We've increased from the 39.85%, again, due to higher than expected beginning fund balances. So thanks to all the department heads for their prudent spending during the year, as well as growth in our revenue that we've seen. For fiscal year '23, I'm recommending a one-time spend down of fund balance to complete some capital improvements. But again, we are ending the year with a very strong fund balance projected. So the capital improvements program, I'm not going to go into that because we are going to talk about that later tonight. But just know that amounts on capital projects fluctuate every year. This year, we're actually seeing a $3.6 million decrease based on our 2 treatment plant upgrades being completed. Most city employees are receiving a 7% pay adjustment this year based on the market rate and needing to retain and attract staff, as many other businesses are facing the same. We also adjusted our seasonal positions as this is one of the highest times of competition, and our starting wages are just about $15 an hour. Our budget also adds 7 full-time positions this year. As you know, the city is growing and demand on city services is as well. So police, we've added in the budget a police officer, a full-time firefighter paramedic that would be fully grant funded for 3 years. If we do not receive the grants, we will have a further discussion with the council at that point. That's the same with the proposed assistant fire chief of operations position, as we have only 1 assistant fire chief right now, but their demand is being taken very strongly with short-term rental inspections, business inspections, and plan review. We've also added a code enforcement officer that is covered by the fees for business licenses related to short-term rentals to help with enforcement of our short-term rental program. And we've added a building inspector and a facilities maintenance technician in the Parks Department and a human resources generalist position due to just growing demands on those city services. So with that, our total budgeted revenues and other financing sources for all funds totaled about $35.5 million, which is about 5.3% lower than the last year. The FY23 budget for expenditures is about $4.3 million with $10 million in interfund transfers. I will say that the transfers have increased and The library board acted last week to move about $715,000 from their library fund to a library depreciation reserve fund, as they had received donations of significant amount that is going to be restricted for future improvements and equipment of the library itself. So significant building repairs that meet our capitalization threshold. And so we thank all of the generous donations that the library has been able to secure. And so that will be completed within this fiscal year. So with that, we continue to make great progress on improving our fund balance, improving our funding of capital projects with cash less debt, facing financing costs, and then addressing some of our unfunded personnel liabilities that we had in the past. We're definitely preparing more with budgeting for retirements, as well as capping our personnel paid time off as well with our two unions, police and fire. So with that, I am very grateful to all the help that department heads have provided me this year, as well as their staff. It was definitely a challenging year without a finance director, and hoping this will be the last for a while. But with that, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to answer them at this time.
We hope for your sake as well. Any questions for Dana on the FY23 budget, and for that matter, the tax levies and assessments? Not seeing any. We did advertise for public hearings, and we'll hold one public hearing for resolutions 15 through 25. Is there any public comment this evening? Michelle, how about online?
If you would like to speak towards the budget, please raise your hand. Nope, we're good.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion approving resolutions 22-15 through 25.
Mr. Mayor, I would make a motion to approve resolutions 15 through 25, the city budget.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Davis. Further discussion?
I just want to make a couple of comments, John, before we move forward on this. For the public's purposes, you may not have heard any questions from us this evening. We've been over this budget with Dana and staff over the past 2 months. And so what you see here before you is a result of questions asked and answered and direction taken. So understand that this was a collaborative process between council and Dana and staff to come to this budget. And with that said, I've got no further comments.
Thank you, Frank. Further comments from the council? Not seeing any. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign, and those resolutions carry unanimously. Michelle. Thanks very much, Dana. We'll move on to item 6C of our agenda, which is consideration of a request from Vincent Remmel on behalf of OBR Management LLC for a conditional use permit to operate a recreational marijuana dispensary in the WB3 General Business District, and the property is located at 333 Baker Avenue. Dave.
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening.
So, this is a conditional use permit. Typically, marijuana dispensaries are an administrative conditional use permit. However, we did receive a comment when we did notice the neighbors. We're just in discussion with the city attorney. We decided to elevate it to a full conditional use permit because we couldn't put conditions on there that would alleviate the concerns that were raised. And so this did go through the planning board, and it's now before you guys for your consideration. So this proposed dispensary is at 333 Baker Avenue. It does meet all the city standards for dispensaries, including the distancing requirement under state law, and that's something that our code defers to how the state regulates that. And the state has a 3-part test, basically. Are the entrance doors of a church or school on the same street as the proposed dispensary? Does it have an address on the same street as the proposed dispensary, dispensary from a school or a church? And then is the distance from that measured within 500 feet or less? And while there are a couple of the churches are within 500 feet, it doesn't meet the 3-part test of the state law, so the state is okay to license it there. Therefore, within our code, we are okay with that location. As far as off-street parking goes, there's No off-street parking requirement for retail in that WB3 zoning district. However, they have a parking area on site that could fit 3 or 4 cars depending on how the cars are oriented or the lot's striped. So it's in the WB3 zoning district, as I mentioned, which is our retail district downtown. And looking at the proposal, we get notified of the neighbors and received several comments. We had about 10 comments that opposed having a dispensary at that location, including from 2 nearby churches. We did receive 1 letter in support, and then we had some comments from the Whitefish Credit Union, which were some of the ones that were raised issues that we couldn't mitigate with conditions of approval, which helped elevate that. All those letters that we had should be in your packet, which starts on page 221. So in looking at a conditional use permit, we do look at whether it meets the growth policy requirements. I mean, this is a retail store in the area of our downtown that is the center of retail and where we allow retail uses within the WB3. So it is compliant with that portion of the growth policy. As far as setbacks, height, lot coverage, it's an existing commercial building, so they aren't changing the facade or anything. The proposed dispensary is going to be on one side, not on access by Baker Avenue, but on 3rd Street or 4th Street, off of 4th Street. And then as far as the marijuana facility standards, I talked about the distance requirements, and then all the other standards will be met or else will be conditions of approval of the conditional use permit. So mentioning access, again, they have off-street parking available that they can fit up to 4 cars. When it comes to other access, I mean, the fire marshal can review the building plans to ensure all emergency standards are being met for access to the facility, but it is an existing building. And so we're going to add a condition that that parking lot be striped so that people know how to park there and they can fit at least 4 cars in there if it's striped properly. It's on existing city water and sewer services, again, existing building, so some of these conditions don't apply. There's no traffic study required because the number of vehicle trips don't meet that threshold. As far as neighborhood impact, we do have a requirement for dust, smoke, glare, or heat. Consumption of marijuana on site is prohibited by state law, so while somebody might be able to buy a package, much like a liquor store, they have to, take it off-site somewhere out of the public to be able to consume it, so there won't be issues with that, or smoke, fumes, gas, or odors. Hours of operation, state law requires them to be closed by 8 p.m. Looking at the context of the individual existing neighborhood, there's other retail uses in that area. Just up the street, there's a existing liquor store that's directly across the street from the Catholic church. The marijuana distances requirements are very similar to how the state regulates liquor stores and any place that sells hard liquor. So looking at the criteria, staff did feel like it does meet the criteria of the code to allow approval. We did add some conditions on there though, if it is approved, including the applicant has to provide bicycle racks to accommodate up to 4 bicycles in the existing building. Any interior remodel or plumbing work needs to have a building permit. Any lighting needs to be dark sky compliant. Again, as I mentioned, the paved parking lot must be striped to accommodate at least 4 vehicles. All required permits from the State of Montana Department of Revenue must be obtained before they can open. Any building facade changes and things like that have to go through architectural review, although I don't believe they're having any. We have some requirements on window signage that's based on our marijuana ordinance, as well as our WB3 zoning, and so they can't have security bars or metal screens or grates or other visible security devices. They have to have a surveillance security system, deadbolt locked doors, and safes to store that facilities, and then they do have to operate in a way that ensures the safety and welfare of the public and workers. And then any remnants or byproducts of marijuana have to be safely secured. They have to get a sign permit, and it's good for 18 months. So this did go to the Whitefish Planning Board on July 21st. At that public hearing, the applicant spoke and went over their request. They also referenced a study that talked about impacts of dispensaries on neighborhoods. We did have someone from the credit union spoke opposing the request, as well as a property owner that lives on Central Avenue, has 2 properties on Central Avenue, that also opposed it, as well as another additional resident of Northwoods that came and opposed it. All the minutes of that are in the packet. After the public hearing, the planning board did vote 3-1 to approve the conditional use permit or recommend approval to the city council. And we're glad to answer any questions that you guys might have.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions for Director Taylor? Okay. Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on what, or on this request, for a conditional use permit, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Anyone wishing to comment this evening on this item? Sir.
Good evening. Thank you all very much for your time. My name is Ian Stewart. I'm here on behalf of OBR Management. I reside in Missoula, Montana at 2409 Raymond Avenue. I've been a resident of the state for 20 years. My family office operates and works in business development and M&A. We are hyper-focused in the cannabis sector, and we primarily work in the Midwest and the East Coast. However, given the proximity to Missoula and Whitefish and the fact that this is in my wheelhouse, I agreed to work on behalf of OBR Management to help them work with the city in an effort to get permitted. I'd like to just touch on a couple of the points that were brought up in the comments provided to you all in the packet, and at the same time kind of provide a high-level overview relative to the OBR Management Company as a whole. The company is a Montana limited liability company focused in the Flathead Valley. OBR is a management company that oversees the assets exclusively held in the cannabis sector. The company has a cultivation, processing, and dispensary already in existence in Evergreen, Montana, and is a locally owned business whose members have been residing in Whitefish for over 30 years. Mr. Remmel and his family have owned businesses in the city of Whitefish ranging in wellness products, European imports, and health foods. OBR plans to conduct business in a professional manner, operating with best practices, and is dedicated to bringing high-end consumer packaged goods to the market here in Whitefish. The company has been working under the guidance of the Regulatory and Corporate Council. Corporate Council is here local to Whitefish, and they've helped us structure all the legal documents and everything in an effort to make sure that we're compliant from a structural standpoint with the state. Our Regulatory Council is based out of Bozeman. He's not here today because he's on vacation in Hawaii. However, we've been in touch all day today working together to essentially respond to some of the concerns. It's noted that he's been working compliance as a regulatory counsel for 14 plus years in the state, and also provides significant insight and professional opinions to the Department of Revenue, along with the Cannabis Control Division, who oversees the program here based on the Montana statute. Council has advised OBR as to the compliance of the 333 Baker Avenue location located in the WB3 zoning district here in Whitefish. I'll take the next couple minutes to just touch on 3 points specific to the comments that were provided in the packet. The first, and I think the most important, is the compliance on proximity to place of worship and or school. It's important to understand that administrative rules are technically state law. In other words, we are not stuck with the law at the moment it was signed by the governor. The legislature gave the Cannabis Control Division, or the CCD, which is a division of the Department of Revenue, the power and authority to implement the Montana Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, which was enacted in 2021. Thus, the language of the ordinance was intended to follow state law wherever it may lead, and the CCD is who interprets the state law. Thus, the ordinance follows the rule, and the rule reads as such. Pursuant to state law and the rules governing the determination of proximity to place of worship or school, the state rule reads, in order to apply provisions of 16-12-207, Section 3 of the Montana Annotated Code to a cultivator licensee, manufacturer licensee, adult use dispensary licensee in this case, or medical marijuana dispensary licensee, the department must find a 3-part test is fully enacted. The entrance of the doors in this case of the premises proposed for licensing on 333 Baker are actually on 4th Street, and the entrance of the doors of the place of worship or school are situated on the same street. in this case, the Catholic Church on Baker Avenue. Because the doors of the church and the doors of the dispensary are on different streets, the three-part rule does not fully comply. Therefore, if the three-part test is not met in its entirety, the provisions of 1612-207 Montana Annotated Code do not apply. In summary of the above rule, the entrance of the doors of the license of the dispensary, in this case, are on 4th Street, and the doors of the place of worship, St. Charles, are situated on Baker. Therefore, the location does not meet the three-part test in its entirety, and the provisions of 1612-207 do not apply. The site is qualified under state law based on these findings. Secondly, just to touch on the concern regarding safety. In regards to the research paper that was in your packet here, provided from the City of New York, and the University of Colorado Denver and the John Jay College. The research states the following. Street segments with recreational dispensaries experience no changes in violent disorder and drug crime. Secondly, furthermore, the report states studies examining the relationships between dispensaries and crime at the neighborhood level have also yielded sparse evidence of increased crime. This was from the report provided in the general comment period. It is also important to note that one of the statutory purposes of Montana Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act is to eliminate the illicit market for marijuana. Dispensaries allow for a secure and compliant marketplace for patients and adult use consumers to purchase the consumer packaged goods, helping to decrease crime and criminal activity in other public areas or places of business. This was the purpose and intent of the law itself and the statute itself. Thirdly, just to touch on the parking, because there was a note there in the packet addressing the parking. The WB3 zone requires no on-premises parking. However, our location provides approximately 3 to 4 parking spaces based on the site plan that's included in the packet as well, therefore exceeding the parking requirement for this zoning district. That's all we have as far as comment go. I'm happy to take any questions or concerns.
Thank you, Ian. Any questions for the applicant's representative? Frank?
Ian, are you guys, I couldn't tell from the packet, although I think I can tell. Are you planning to occupy that entire building or just the space, what I'll call on the east side of that building?
No, sir. At this juncture, the intent and what's provided to the city is specifically for the east side of that building.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Further questions? Thanks, Ian.
Yes.
Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
comments this evening.
Thank you.
Any public comment tonight? Sir?
City Council, my name is Josh Wilson, representing Whitefish Credit Union. We sent the letter, and I also want to express our appreciation for Director Taylor and the City Attorney for finding this merit in the letter to raise it and elevate it for the public comment and the discussion that we've been having since then. We received many letters, obviously within the packet, including signatures from the church. So at least it's a robust discussion about the dispensary at this location. The nature of the letter, and I'll get right to it, is that the credit union has 2 properties, one at 300 Baker Avenue across the street, and then 2 over across from that building. We also operate a 24-hour ATM within that facility. The sale of recreational marijuana represents a threat to the physical safety of our employees and our employees and our members. And that really comes down to the university study to which we looked at to say, what is the impact to dispensary across from our business? The representative for OBR management cited specifically there's no rise in violent crime, which is accurate within the statement, but it also clearly states with that City of University of New York study, the University of Denver, that there was a statistically significant increase in the rates of neighborhood crime and disorder. So the definitions here are important because that part was glossed over and it dismisses our concerns which we had, which is neighborhood crime. Violent crime, as the study defines, relates to homicide, assault, but neighborhood crime is also categorized as burglary and theft. Major issues that we know are consistent with dispensaries. So within that area, and specifically the study, we know that this study being unique is not looking at the county level or city level, but it specifically looks at street segments around those dispensaries. And that is why we wrote our letter in opposition, to know that it presents a threat to our buildings, our employees, and our members. The W3Ds district, obviously, as you guys know, presents the ability for the council to deny an application that adversely affects the context of its existing neighborhood and for the community character. And we humbly respect that within that space, the B3 district, that you decline this application. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your comments. Further comment this evening from the public? Rhonda?
Good evening, councilors and mayor. Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupfer Avenue, which is one house in from the corner of 4th, so I can, from my upstairs deck, see this building from my house. In December of 2021, when you approved the text amendment for medical marijuana facilities, the packet included the map that I have given you, where it clearly shows some areas of the B3 where medical marijuana facilities are restricted, including the location that is proposed for this facility. You added in front of Central School, and in the conversation about that, in both the staff report and in the recording of the meeting, which you can see on YouTube, the planning director says, dispensaries cannot be located within 500 feet from and on the same street as a building used as a church, synagogue, or public school, measured from nearest entrance to nearest entrance. Cities can't have less restrictive setbacks than the state, but they can be more restrictive. So it doesn't really matter what the state's rule is. You adopted an ordinance that says you can't have these within 500 feet addressed on the same street, measured from nearest entrance to nearest entrance. And you can look at that on YouTube. You can look at it in your text amendment language. And you can look at it on the map. And, you know, this is kind of a classic bait and switch. People looked at that and said, okay, there won't be any there. And now one is proposed. And nothing has changed. I also stapled the sign that's at that intersection on 4th when you look across. That's been there as long as I can remember. And the reason it's there is because this is a popular route for kids walking or riding their bikes to Central School from the other side of the river who go over the footbridge. So I hope you'll think long and hard about giving a conditional use permit in a location that you already told the neighborhood there wouldn't be one. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. Further public comment tonight? Michelle, how about online?
Andrew, if you'd like to unmute your mic, state your name and address, you can
Sure.
have the floor.
Yeah, my name is Andrew Strong. I have two homes on Central Avenue, 435 Central and 405 Central. I appeared at the planning board meeting and submitted a letter prior to that meeting. And I also submitted a letter on Friday to the city attorney, Angela Jacobs. And I'll take on the first issue that the applicant mentioned, which is the 500-foot radius rule. And let me just, I want to echo what Rhonda said, because I believe as a matter of law that you cannot approve this application or you will be in violation of your own ordinance. So I just want to put that out there. And the reason is because state law, which is in Montana Code annotated, and the section was cited earlier, it's section 1612-207, has a two-part test that prohibits the issuance of a license. And the two-part test are undisputable facts, that you have 3 churches within 500 feet, you have a daycare within 500 feet of this location. It's undisputed also that the I can't get the Catholic Church is addressed on the same street as this address. It is 260 Baker Avenue, and this is 333 Baker Avenue. So by virtue of state law, this cannot be permitted as a marijuana dispensary. And that was in 2021, as you know. In December of last year, when the board approved, or the city council approved the ordinance 11334 to amend the city's ordinance, you copied that same two-prong test, but you added a word to the second part of the test, which is addressed on the same street. So we have two indisputable facts that there's one church at least within 500 feet, and the second indisputable fact is that that church is addressed at the same address of this proposed dispensary. At that time, the planning director stated to the council that the city can be more restrictive, not less restrictive than state law. And at that time, the regulation that's been mentioned, which has this three-part test, wasn't even in existence. So that regulation was proposed by the Montana Department of Revenue in the springtime, and it became a rule governing how that department will administer and control marijuana facilities on May 28, 2022. And so, from my perspective, that you cannot come back and say that what we really meant in the code when we amended it in December was that it would relate to something that happens in the future. When it refers to state law, it says state law plus these two prongs. So it's a two-prong test that applies in this instance, not the three-prong test, which is more permissive or less restrictive. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments tonight.
No other online comments.
I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for discussion, or preferably a motion one way or another to move the conversation forward. Of course. Question. Rebecca.
Dave, two things. One, could you comment on Rhonda's statement that this is not in an area that we were going to allow these?
So, I mean, that map was put together when we first did the ordinance, that we showed blue lines where it talks about a state mandated 500-foot buffer from schools or church entrances. So we just generally showed where a church entrance was and then drew a line down that street within 500 feet. And that was, I mean, this isn't part of the code. It was just something we showed as an example when the ordinance came forward. And so, our ordinance talks about pursuant to state law. In other words, deferring to state law on the distancing requirements. So whatever the state's going to regulate, however they're going to do it, we didn't want to be too specific because, the law could change, but we generally wanted to outline what it was so people knew, what to expect, so.
And in your understanding of why that law was initially placed in the state of Montana for alcohol and now for marijuana is to protect children and to respect people's values, or?
I mean, I can't speculate on why that was passed, but, it's been in state law for a long time of the distancing between alcohol sales and churches and schools.
Okay, and then from what I understand, we have 8 administrative CUP permits already approved within city limits because they're like this applicant, they were already licensed as a medical marijuana dispensary. So they had the ability to obtain an administrative CUP as long as they build out their business by June of 2023. So those, is that me? Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll try to, speed it up here. So the thing that I was noticing, it seemed like all of them, the places that were picked were already all retail establishments that had been used for retail business. Is that right?
I think most of them, some of them one of them was a restaurant. I can't say all of them were retail
Marcus,
previously.
next to Marcus was.
Yeah, that was professional offices in that location, and next to Marcus. you know, we only have 2 of them that are open in city limits right now. Whether all of those ones will open within their 18th month period, who knows? I mean, a lot of times businesses get things and they never operate, so.
Right. So this location has always been used for, as a professional office? Is that what it's never been used for retail?
As far as I know, it's been a professional office. Yeah, I don't recall a retail business being in that building since I've lived here, but.
So I have a professional office between 4th and 5th, and I'm not allowed to do retail, but I'm outside the borders of our downtown district. But I know someone else farther down between 5th and 6th got talked to by you about selling retail because it was not allowed in that district. So this is, are you saying this is in the district to sell retail? But
It's WB3, yeah, it's where we want all of our retail in the city, small item retail.
And it's just
according to
on the border of
zoning.
it, though, even though historically it's never been used for retail.
Yeah, but it's zoned for that, yep.
Okay. Those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Further questions for Dave? Dave, I have one. The physical address for this property is 333 Baker, yet the entrance faces East 4th Street. How do you measure the 500-foot buffer?
Well, it's directly a direct line from the front door to the front door of the building.
Even though the property is addressed on Baker?
Yeah, yep. So just cut through the building and go straight to the church, how you measure, it's based on, I mean, how we measure it, how the state measures it, which is a straight line. But, you know,
But it's not a straight line if you're drawing a line down East 4th and then north on 2nd.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to follow the streets, it would probably be more than 500 feet, because it's right on the edge of that 500 feet there, but the way we worded it was a straight line, because it's supposed to be, typically it's businesses that are located and addressed on the same street, so you'd be drawing a straight line generally. In this case, the front doors are around the corner. You know, the state added that additional provision that if it's the front doors of the businesses are on a different street than the church, then the 500-foot rule doesn't apply. And so, again, that's why we defer and we talk about pursuant to state law in our code, so that if the state adds additional things, then we stay consistent with how the state measures it. So if we don't want to permit things that the state's going to deny, based on their rules, basically. So they could become more restrictive or they become less restrictive, but we're trying to eliminate having to change our code every time the state changes theirs, right?
And Angie, you're in agreement with that conclusion?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, John. Maybe? I'm on. Liquor license is the same way, except for the distance requirement is 600 feet. And the DOR years ago issued an administrative regulation that was, it was a strange administrative regulation I won't go into, but basically the Montana Supreme Court said that the intent of the statute governing liquor licenses, which is nearly identical to this statute, was that they have the same entrance on the same street, and that is how you measured the 500 feet. So.
Okay, thank you. Ben?
Just as a quick follow-up, what would stop somebody from simply changing the entrance to their building to get around these regulations? And could that be done?
Building permit.
Sounds weird. I guess they could. I mean, and Michelle also just told me that, although this proposed dispensary has an address on Baker, it could have an address in 4th, and in fact, it probably should have an address on 4th, given the fact that that's where the entrance is and has traditionally been, so.
Further questions for staff? Rebecca, please. Thank you.
I make a motion to deny WCUP 22-18, and I will address that if I get a second.
Is there a second to the motion?
For purposes of discussion, I will second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Rebecca?
I figured. I'm going to vote against this, which I did on the planning board as well, because we intentionally put in a full CUP into our ordinance for just this situation when we got a major outcry from the public. We know that this location is, like I measured it myself, within 250 feet of a church, and that was to the one near the kiddie park. And also, I think it is an appropriate denial given that our conditional use permit allows us to look at the character of the neighborhood and also the will of the public. And so we have had very strong outcry from the people that are actually directly adjacent and next to this site against it. We will be having 8 other places in town for this use. I do think the city planning staff did the correct thing in going through our laws correctly and all that, but I do think it changes the neighborhood character if it's approved because it will be going 7 days a week till 8 o'clock at night. And historically, this has been a professional building, Monday through Friday, business hours. I don't know whether or not it's a danger to the credit union and if it will suddenly create crime or if there's a danger to children, but it is also on one of the routes to schools. And I think because the sign is on Baker, the address is on Baker, I just feel like it's one of those areas where it's better to be cautious and not proceed with this one. I think there's enough evidence that shows that it will change the historic use of this neighborhood, and the people that are impacted most by that are against it.
Thanks, Rebecca. Further comments on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. Let's do this again. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. And the motion fails on a 3-1 vote with Councilor Norton voting in favor. I'll entertain a second motion.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve WCUP 22-18, the findings of fact and the staff report, 14 conditions of approval as recommended to us by our own Whitefish Planning Board on
Is there
their
a second
July
to the
21st
motion?
meeting.
I again will second, at least for purposes of discussion.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Andy, would you like to address your
Yeah,
motion?
just very briefly, I guess. I'm not swayed by the existing use of the building argument that it's a professional office and now it's going to be a retail because it's in the WB3. It could be a shoe store, it could be a shoe store, it could be an ice cream store, it could be anything. So it could be a retail establishment open until 11 o'clock if they wanted to. I mean, that would be something that they would be able to do without a conditional use permit. So that's not a valid argument to me. I have a hard time with the proximity argument because I think from both our planning staff and from our city attorney, we say that that's not a valid argument for denial. So I can't really hang my hat on that one for denial. And the crime argument, I think I would certainly have to look at those studies pretty carefully to see where the location of those facilities were that were studied and those kinds of things. I mean, arguably we have a liquor store that's a block up the street and I don't think we've seen a significant increase in crime there, and alcohol probably causes more problems in this country than marijuana does, so it's not a valid argument for me either, so therefore I will approve it.
Further comments? Ben?
Yeah, I'd make a quick comment on the legal aspects of this application, because I'm going to support Andy's motion, and at the end of the day, it's going to be because it's very hard for me to go against our planning director and our city attorney who are saying that this is the correct way to interpret these regulations. The rules are the rules. But I will say that it has raised an eyebrow to me about the nature of these rules and the way that this is implemented. You know, this map that was brought back in front of us, it does bring back my recollection of our discussion of where these were going to go, and I would be hard pressed to say that I would have expected one to end up here based on how we talked about it before. But as I said, I do think the way it's written is the way it's written. I think it's very hard for us to turn it down based on our own legal interpretations when our attorney and planning director are saying otherwise. So I'm going to support the motion.
Thank you, Ben. Further comments? Rebecca? You sure can.
I'd make a motion to have signage changed to Fourth Street from Baker Avenue.
Angie, is that a valid condition that we can apply to this application?
Mitigated by signage being on Baker rather than where the entrance to the dispensary will be. I think it is a condition you could add, Dave, you can.
Well, just my only comment would be that it's a multi-tenant building, so some of the other tenants might not like the sign moved, although they could have a separate sign off of Fourth, potentially, if they wanted to make that condition.
Is there a second to the friendly amendment?
Yeah, I'll second it.
And that was seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Rebecca, would you like to speak to that amendment?
Yeah, I do think it's confusing to the public to have the address and the signage accessing Baker, and it's a major thoroughfare into town. I think it would be more discreet if it was on Fourth, maybe not so upsetting to some of the neighbors.
Okay, further comment on the friendly amendment? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that passes on a 3-1 vote with Councilor Fury voting in opposition, which brings us back to the original motion for approval with the one friendly amendment. Further comments? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign. And that passes on a 3-1 vote with Councilor Norton voting in opposition. Thanks for attending tonight. We'll move on to item 6D of our agenda, which will be ordinance 22-11, an ordinance rezoning approximately 31.171 acres of land known as Tract 3 of Certificate of Survey number 20440 in Section 1, Township 30 North, Range 22 West in Flathead County, Montana, from County SAG 5, which is their suburban agricultural, to our WCR, which is our county residential district equivalent, and adopting findings with respect to such rezone. Dave.
Thank you. Good evening again. Michelle, you can go to the next slide. This item starts on page 327 of your packet. So this is a request by the city to change the zoning on this property that was recently annexed into the city. So in Resolution 2210, the City Council annexed this property on June 20th. And after any property becomes part of the city, we have to change the zoning to meet this, have Whitefish zoning rather than county zoning. Currently, it's zoned County SAG 5, which is a 5-acre agricultural zone, and our closest equivalent zoning is WCR, which is a 2.5-acre zoning. We don't have a 5-acre zone or a 10-acre zone. We go straight to a 15 in Whitefish. And so, WCR district, it's intended for detached single-family homes together with farm and/or accessory buildings situated in a setting conducive to a rural lifestyle is how we define that. As far as the changes in the zoning, I mentioned that the lot area being 2.5 acres versus 5 acres. However, the WCR has a bigger front setback of 50 feet rather than 20 feet in the SAG 5 county. The side setbacks are the same, the rear setbacks are the same. But the lot coverage is only 10% in the WCR, so it's much more restrictive than the SAG 5, which is 25%. This particular parcel is over 31 acres. It's undeveloped. It does contain a seasonal freshwater emergent wetland, which is basically a drainage swale through the property, which gets wet in the spring. Runs up basically north and south up to the Whitefish Assembly of God Church property to the north. The existing future land use map calls this out as a combination of rural and suburban residential. If you can go to the next slide. And the appropriate zoning for rural is our WA zoning, and suburban is WCR, WER, WSR. And so, again, we're just looking for the whole thing to be WCR. We're not looking at the suburban portion of that, but you can see on the future land use map what that outline is on that. We did send out a public notice, properties within 150 feet. We did get one email comment objecting to the zone change, and then we had some additional letters that were submitted that should be in your packet that came after this was written. As far as the zone change under state law, the findings of fact, and is this made in accordance with the growth policy? Again, the growth policy future land use map designates this parcel as suburban residential and rural. Split by those two things. The WCR is a country residential zoning. Well, it falls within the rural residential, which is kind of in between suburban residential and rural. It's not either suburban residential or rural, although a portion of that property is suburban residential. And WCR is appropriate in suburban residential as well. So it's the closest Whitefish equivalent zoning. The county zoning directly to the west of this is the county 2.5 acres, so it's the same as this zoning. It's not more dense as it goes towards Cara, or more or less dense. And then there's higher density property to the north. So we'll, as far as looking at fire and safety, city engineering standards and zoning standards will be reviewed at the time of any development. This is one parcel, so right now only one single-family house can go on here unless they do a subdivision. So if there is a subdivision in the future, we can apply any additional restrictions. Obviously, we have certain standards in our water quality ordinance with regard to wetlands and drainage soils and those things, and we'd look at that at the time of subdivision. But as far as zoning goes, again, this was just an annexation rezone, so we're just changing it to the existing Whitefish equivalent zoning. Public utilities are available near the property. City water and sewer is located nearby Headman Lane and JP Road. This is within our city extension of services plan. And so if there is any future subdivision, then we'll extend services and again, do any other reviews that we need to make sure this complies with our city code and our subdivision regulations. As far as transportation systems, again, this property is accessed off of JP Road or Headman Lane. It could, potentially be accessed towards Caro Avenue if there were some connections made there, or through the church property, but right now the only connection to get to that property is off of that Headman Lane or JP Road. So I mentioned this is, future land use of suburban, residential, and rural. The WCR is a rural residential zoning district and also a suburban residential district. This is the equivalent to a Whitefish zoning code, or the closest equivalent that we have, and so we feel like it's the appropriate zone change for this particular parcel. So staff did recommend approval of this zone change and recommended that to the Whitefish Planning Board. The Planning Board hearing, which was on July 21st, we did hold a public hearing. There was the attorney, Michelle Weinberg, got up and spoke, and representing South Whitefish Neighborhood Association opposing the request. We did have also Brian Luke, whose family owns a bunch of the property to the west, and he just talked about the wetland and been in his family for 60 years and talking about being a wildlife corridor, and mentioned the drainage swale not being a perennial stream, but certainly flowing in the spring. So the planning board after that, they made a motion to approve, and they recommended unanimous approval 4-0 on this proposed zone change due to annexation. I'd be glad to answer any other questions that you guys might have.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions for Director Taylor? Rebecca.
Dave, some of the comments that we received at the planning board said that people weren't noticed correctly that lived within 150 feet.
And that's what our code requires for a zone change, is a mailing within 150 feet. We do send those out. I don't, sometimes stuff happens in the mail, or sometimes the county might have addresses wrong. I don't know the reason why not everybody got notified. Some properties were probably outside of that 150 feet that maybe just got missed. But we do send out our mailings and do our due diligence to make sure that they're accurate and review what we get from Flathead County.
And I guess I have a question for Angie. Does that affect the public process if people felt like their right to participate was not allowed?
Well, not knowing the circumstances, Rebecca, of why they didn't receive notice or how they didn't receive notice, I mean, I guess I can't really provide an opinion on whether or not it affects their right to process. I mean, we published it in the paper. It's been on our agenda, it's been through planning board. So if they're complaining that they weren't properly noticed, I mean, clearly they had noticed that something was going on if they're saying if they're attending a public meeting or writing a letter and saying that I wasn't properly noticed. I mean, without knowing why, I know the planning staff is very diligent about getting mailings out, but again, like Dave said, things happen. Sometimes stuff gets lost in the mail. It doesn't happen very often, but again, if somebody has notice and is willing to write a letter saying I wasn't properly noticed, that's, to me, they have the ability to participate. I mean, we can only control so much as a city, whether or not people receive the proper notice when we're going through the channels that we always go through to notice people.
One other thing, Rebecca, is, you know, the notice goes to the property owner, so if someone's a renter, they're probably not gonna get it. And also, I've just been hearing back from people that are Canadian residents that, you know, they're getting their notices after the meeting. It's taking them way more than 10 days for stuff, or 15 days for notices to get through the Canadian system and get mailed up there. I don't know, it's just our mail service, and it used to be a lot faster, so I don't know how we control that, but.
What you're saying is we did our part and it doesn't matter if they tell us they didn't get it or not, really? Is that right?
Rebecca, what I can say is we're abiding by what the state law notice requirements are. And again, we only have control over so much. And if people are complaining about not getting noticed at a public meeting, then they were clearly aware that there was a public meeting. They're mailing those in before a public meeting.
What was the president of the homeowners association, I think of Great Northern, that noticed that. And so she's aware of everybody up there. So I just wanted to know if it had an effect on the legality of what we're doing.
I mean, again, all we can do is go through the proper channels of noticing, and when the planning department tells me they went through the proper notices, I mean, things fall through the cracks, certainly, but I have seen very few instances, and Dave's exactly right. I can't remember what other project it was, but it was Canadian homeowners that weren't getting their notice because the mail took so long, so.
Okay, thank you.
I had a quick question, Dave, more procedural. If this passes this evening and then ultimately does get developed, obviously the developer's due diligence, I would assume that given the fact that the Calypso report indicated there's over 14 acres of emergent wetland, this is an intermittent stream. It's also identified in our stormwater utility plan because it drains all the way north to West 6th Street and then into the Whitefish River on a seasonal basis. If the Army Corps comes back and states, because it is their responsibility to determine whether or not these wetlands are jurisdictional under the Clean Water Act, if they were to come back hypothetically and declare these non-jurisdictional, as I recall, our water quality ordinance is more restrictive. What development setbacks and restrictions would we then place on these 14 acres?
I just take a second and look that up. I can't remember what the intermittent stream setback is. I don't know if Craig remembers, but.
And also the wetland setback.
Yeah, there's a wetland setback.
Because I mean, that's 14 out of the 31 acres we're referring to.
So there'd be a significant portion of it that would have setback requirements. You know, I don't know what, you know, the developer's plans for this are, what they're thinking about doing. Right now, it's just annexed into the city, so we'll have control over whatever happens here and be able to review all that stuff at the time of subdivision if you want. I can, you know, look up what those setbacks are if you want to give me a second.
I'd appreciate that. Okay. Further questions for Dave? Not seeing any. We did advertise a public hearing for ordinance 22-11, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Is the applicant or applicant's representative here first to speak to the application?
City is the applicant because
that's right.
It's the city
so you
annexation rezone. Yeah.
Thank you, Dave.
But
we'll take public comment now. Who would like to begin?
Hi, Lindsay Ramadka with Weinberg and Ramadka, 116 Lutfer Avenue, Whitefish. Mr. Mayor, you hit what I want to talk about squarely on the head, which is the wetlands. And I submitted a letter, but it was after 4, and so I'm not sure if you guys got it.
We did.
Oh, great. Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. As you said, the subject property contains 14 acres of wetlands, and that is essentially half of the property. So we are opposed to zoning this to 2.5 acres. I'm sorry, I represent the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association, not sure if I said that. So the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association thinks that this should be zoned agricultural, which, you know, is what SAG 5 is. It's an agricultural zone. WCR is more suburban residential, and as you can see on the future land use map, zoning this entire property, WCR, does not comply with the growth policy. Instead, we think this should be WA 15. That is most of what I want to say. So, thanks.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Carol Watkins, 143 Old Morris Trail. I am the property owner to the south. Closer?
Thank you.
I thought you'd have to listen harder. I'm the property owner to the south. And yes, it may be seasonal, but so is the Whitefish River. You got spring melt in the Whitefish River, it's big. Now, just like that, it's not big. And my worry, it does go all the way to 7th Street. John Wilson and I had huge conversation about this wetlands. So you can call John Wilson too. My biggest worry, first shovel of dirt is going to flood my property. So do I have to be responsible for monitoring my property the rest of my life, or do you have to be responsible for flooding my property when you shovel in that wetlands? That's my question. And I think it's a legitimate one. I've lived there since I can't remember, it was 94, 95. I have a herd of 15 animals. It's in conservation easement. I depend on that pasture 9 months out of the year. If it floods, I don't have any pasture land. So I don't know how you're going to stop it from flooding unless you dig culverts. I don't know. But the first shovel in the ground will flood my property. I'm pretty sure about that. So they've given you a map. I paid for a flyover in 1st of July. You can't walk, we can't even get a tractor out there until the middle of July, then it's fire season. And if you walk out there right now, you're going to sink in over your shoe tops. So if you give them 2.5 acres, half of their property is underwater half of the year. It can't be done, just cannot be done, except on the west line, maybe on the far east line, but that whole middle, I wouldn't even want to be the responsible person for building a house out there. It just won't happen. My biggest worry is flooding my property. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Further public comment tonight? Michelle, any comment online?
No, thank you.
Okay. We'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council. Ben.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve WZC 22-04 and adopt the finding of facts in the staff report and rezone the 19.375 acre parcel to WER-SC.
Wrong item.
Am I reading the one?
Yep. We are on item 6D, ordinance 22-11.
Sorry, this is a very complicated agenda tonight.
It is.
Yes, okay, I would move to approve ordinance number 22-11. Did I get that right?
Yep.
WZC 22-05.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Fury. Ben, would you like to speak to your motion?
Just briefly, I'd say this looks like a fairly straightforward rezone for this parcel coming into the city. I understand the concerns about the wetlands, and I trust that those concerns will be addressed at the time this property is developed.
Okay. Further comments on the motion?
I have one.
Rebecca?
Yeah, I think the 2.5 is appropriate, but I do have concerns about us really not allowing trespassing onto adjacent properties. So we will be watching this. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign. And the motion does carry on a 3-1 vote with Counselor Sweeney voting in opposition. We will move on to item 6E of the agenda, which will be ordinance number 22-12. Bear with me as I read through this. An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Whitefish rezoning approximately 19.375 acres of unaddressed land located between Park Knoll Lane and JP Road and known as Tract 3 BBD, located in the southwest quarter of the southeast quarter and the southeast quarter of the southwest quarter in Section 1, Township 30 North, Range 22 West in Flathead County, Montana, that are zoned WCR County Residential District to split zoning of WERSC Estate Residential District with special conditions and WR2-SC Two-Family Residential District with special conditions, and 11.26 acres of land addressed as 6208 US Highway 93 South and known as Tract 3B in the southwest quarter of the southeast quarter in Section 1, Township 20 North, Range 22 West in Flathead County that are zoned WER Estate Residential District and WB2, our secondary business district, to split zoning of WR2-SC, Two-Family Residential District with special conditions, and WB2, secondary business district, and adopting findings with respect to such rezone. Dave.
Thanks, John. I'm glad you had to read that and not me. So yeah, this is a proposed zoning map amendment to change what's currently WCR and WER with a portion of the WER lot also WB2. Proposing a portion of that be Whitefish Estate Residential, which is WER, and then the more urban density of WR2 adjacent to the future Avenue, Baker Avenue right-of-way in the portion that we have called out as urban. And so there'd be a suburban land use on the suburban portion and an urban on the urban portion, and then on the property that's to the south of that, there would be asking for a WR2, which is consistent with the future land use map of urban, and then keeping the WB2 on there. And then with this proposal, the applicants have been in touch with adjacent neighborhoods, the Park Knoll neighborhood and the Great Northern Heights neighborhood. And out of those discussions with that neighborhood, they've agreed to offer up a special conditions rezone, which is something that's in our code, conditional zoning, with some additional restrictions on the property. And the restrictions that they're offering up would be any minimum yard setback for any new lot located adjacent to any property located on or adjacent to Park Knoll Lane or JP Road west of the future Baker Avenue intersection would have an additional 5-foot setback added onto the required yard setback that directly abuts those properties. And then they also would agree to only single-family residential development located adjacent to any property located on or adjacent to Park Knoll Lane or JP Road west of the future Baker Avenue intersection. And so they were willing to offer that up. It seemed to appease the neighborhood's concerns about density and having some buffering between their neighborhoods and whatever development happens here. Again, this is just a zone change. We don't have a development proposal. We don't know exactly what's going to happen there, how dense it's going to be, or what the layout's going to be. But they have offered up that there'd be only single-family residential development that would abut their neighborhoods, and then an additional 5-foot setback off of whatever is there. It's probably going to be rear setbacks, because we'd rather not have vehicles parking or pulling out onto any major arterials like Baker or JP Road, backing out with driveways. So it'd be internal development, which is most likely a rear setback. So as I mentioned, can you go to the next slide, Michelle? It's frozen. So with regard to the R2 district, that would be a WR2-SC, which would be special conditions with that additional setback on there. And that is for, 1 or 2 family residential district in an urban setting. And the WER, a single family large tract estate development, which is a 20,000 square foot lot. And that would be in those areas that have a suburban future land use. So if you can look on that future land use map, you can see a big portion of it is suburban residential, and then the majority of those lots are urban, shown urban, which is the WR2 would be appropriate for. As I mentioned, the one parcel is over 19 acres, and then the one to the south is about 11.25 acres, with a total of about 30.63 acres. And then 28 of those acres would have the zoning change. There's, again, the small portion on Highway 93 that's currently zoned WB2, and that would remain such. So it's currently predominantly vacant land, flanked to the north and south by urban density zone subdivisions of Park Knoll and Great Northern Heights, and then single-family residential and commercial property to the east that's either vacant or for sale, with the existing used car lot along Highway 93, and then some vacant rural residential property under the same ownership that you guys just voted to change the zoning on to the west. And again, they're currently zoned WCR and WER. And the northern parcel is identified as split between urban and suburban, and so the zoning would match those areas where the future land use splits it, and the existing zoning splits it. And then the future Baker Avenue right-of-way would go through that. Can you go to the next slide, Michelle? And you can kind of see on this is our Highway 93 future land use map, where in general where JP Road, where Baker Avenue would come and connect that. It might not be laid out quite like that when it gets developed. It will probably be further to the east where it connects onto JP Road in more of that urban zoned area rather than where it's located on there, which is kind of a steep hill. So as far as looking at the growth policy, existing map, I mean, talked about all that stuff already, so let me skip ahead a little bit. So we did send out a public notice on June 17th, and we published a notice in the Whitefish pilot. We did receive a comment from MDT that talked about the zone change not impacting MDT facilities. We did receive multiple comments from some neighborhood property owners, and generally in Park Knoll and Great Northern Heights. They had concerns about the density being requested. And then subsequent to their letters being sent in, many of those people did come to the planning board meeting and state that once, after they sent those letters, they were able to meet with the applicants, and a lot of their concerns were mitigated by the conditions that they were willing to offer up. And I'm sure a couple of those people may be at the meeting tonight that can reaffirm that, but you can read their comments in the minutes from the planning board meeting. And then we did also receive 3 letters supporting the zone change as being a good location for infill workforce housing developments. So looking at the findings of fact and how we review this, is this according with the growth policy? Well, looking at the future land use map as we did, it does line up with that. The future land use map shows urban and suburban, and the zoning that's being applied in the suburban section is a zoning that is a suburban zoning, and then the zoning that's being applied in the urban areas is an urban zoning. So that is congruent with our growth policy. And looking at our Highway 93 South Corridor Plan, we did have some findings in there talking about, Objective 1 of Goal B2 talks about better buffering low-density residential uses from adjacent commercial, encourage denser residential in our offices and commercial transition areas along new arterial roads such as Columbia or Baker Avenue. And so looking at the zoning, the WR2 along Baker Avenue makes sense, as that's going to be a major arterial in the future. And then we had a whole section of the plan where we went into great detail talking about the zoning in that area between Great Northern Heights and Park Knoll. We talked about conceptual layouts of Baker Avenue would bisect these parcels from north to south and would be classified as an arterial based on anticipated traffic volume and function. And because the traffic volume and commercial uses permitted to the east, denser uses along the arterial are more appropriate than the low-density residential uses intended for the suburban residential land use. And encouraging uses that transition from commercial to mixed uses with denser residential along the arterial to lower density large lot residential to the west, and that'll help reduce future land use conflicts. And so, looking at this does meet that requirement, or the suggestions from the Highway 93 South Plan. Excuse me one sec. So that finding 1, the proposed zone change from WR2SC or to WR2SC and WERSC is in accordance with the growth policy because it's consistent with the future land use maps that have been adopted. As far as other requirements, does it facilitate the adequate transportation, water, sewer, schools? There is water and sewer available. There's city roads that connect immediately to Highway 93. When this property is developed in the future, we would require JP Road connection and Baker Avenue to be built to connect to that, which has a signalized controlled intersection. This area is within our extension of services plan, and so there are adequate services available. As far as other requirements, things will be looked at when we do our subdivision. We'll look at lot coverage and setbacks and the layouts of all that stuff, but this is just a zone change. So until they come forward with a subdivision or some other type of development proposal, only one residential unit can be built on this lot until it's subdivided. Or either one of these lots. It's actually 2 lots. And so, as I mentioned, there is access off of JP Road, Hedman Lane. Park Knoll is a private road. When Baker Avenue intersects that, then there may be some connection that happens there, but that's down the road, I think. As far as compatible urban growth, I mean, again, we look at the growth policy designating urban as WLR, WR1, and WR2, and the WR2 with those special conditions on there does help implement the growth policy. And then suburban is WCR, WER, WSR. WER is consistent with the future land use map. It's not the most dense suburban zoning. It's right in the middle, and so they're not asking for the maximum here. I think that's important to look at. So we do feel like it is consistent with the growth policy and it does promote compatible urban growth. Looking at this property, it is infill. It is on a major arterial, the highway, Baker Avenue running through there. It's an appropriate location for these zoning districts. It's not anticipated to impact the value of any surrounding buildings. Encourages the most appropriate use of land throughout the jurisdictional area because it is consistent with the zoning and land use envisioned by the Highway 93 South Corridor Plan and compatible with adjacent zoning. And it's also consistent with the historical established trending use patterns of the area and looking at providing some transitional types of zoning between the highway commercial corridor and the residential and suburban residential properties as you go further west. So staff did recommend approval of this zone change. It did go to the Whitefish Planning Board on July 21st. We did have some representative of the applicant spoke and discussed a little bit about the previous development here. As you guys probably remember, there was a growth policy amendment that was proposed, this project called Whitefish 57, which included a little more land than this. And during that time, the city council did want to see the Highway 93 corridor plan finished first so we could better identify what the future land use could be in that area. And there was some other reasons, I'm sure, that the council ended up denying that. Now that the Highway 93 corridor plan's been adopted, they talked about how this was being consistent with that and that they had spoken with the neighbors at Park Knoll and Great Northern Heights. We did have a couple property owners from those neighborhoods come and speak. Those specifics of those are in the minutes, but they, in general, stated that they supported this request based on the additional conditions that they were offering up. And then we still, had some feedback from the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association legal counsel that still opposed the request and made that real known there. So at the planning board meeting, the planning board, after the public hearing, they made a motion to approve, but there were only 4 members present, and so that entered in a 2-2 tie. Therefore, there was not a recommendation for approval. It comes to you guys without a recommendation. Staff does still recommend approval. We do feel like it's consistent with the growth policy and the Highway 93 South Corridor Plan. And since that meeting, I probably mentioned that, at the planning board meeting, there wasn't any kind of there was a verbal offer, but there wasn't anything in writing from Eagle Enterprises with regard to the conditional zoning. And since the planning board meeting, we did have a letter that was submitted to us from Don Kay saying that they would agree to the conditional zoning, and they provided a draft statement of conditions, which is in the packet on page 360, and Don's letter is on page 359 of your packet. So that was some of the concerns of the planning board. I know John Ellis mentioned that he would have supported it, but he felt like that Eagle Enterprises needed to also come up with that statement of conditions. So that is all my staff report. Glad to answer any questions if you have any.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions for Dave? Rebecca?
Yep. Dave, could you speak to how many units will be able to be built at maximum build out?
I haven't done that analysis. It's really going to depend on, the right away, the location of Baker Avenue. If someone were to do a PUD versus a subdivision, we're just looking at high level right here, what's the appropriate zoning? We look at the future land use map. This mirrors what's on the other side of the highway with the commercial corridor down the middle and urban on either side. It's consistent with that. Until someone does a subdivision and proposes something, there could be we don't know how much of the wetland's gonna be set aside, if that's part of this development, or the drainage swale is located. All that stuff's gonna have to come out during the future process when this, if this comes forward for a future development.
I see.
Further questions before we go to our public hearing? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be ordinance 22-12, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Eric is the applicant's representative. Do you have anything additional to add? Carter, great. And just name and address for the record, please, Carter.
Carter Unger, 3275, sorry, I'm a little nervous.
Quite all right.
Mountain Shadows Drive, Whitefish. And thank you, Mayor and councilors, for being here today and giving me the opportunity to present to you the application you've already been presented, for the request for this approval, and to the citizens who have shown up to either support or in concern and opposition. I appreciate you all taking the time out of your days away from your families and work, and it's an important aspect of us growing any community. While this is a very important decision for you all, and I do hope you will approve this so that we can get into the real work of designing and giving you, Councilor Norton, specifics on unit counts and whatnot, it's a pretty simple request in the sense that it is just conforming to the Highway 93 South Corridor Plan, and we're hopeful that we can bring forth a product if we move forward after today that the whole town will be proud of. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great, Carter. Thanks for your comments tonight. Further public testimony this evening?
Lisa Post, 101 Vista Drive, Whitefish, Great Northern Heights HOA president. As Dave said, we were kind of leery before the planning session. Since the planning session, we did have a meeting with Mr. K, and he is willing to put in writing in your packets concessions, and we appreciate that. So I didn't have a chance to do a meeting because that was like last week. So I have something here I'd like to give everybody, which is about 28 signatures from our community in support of this change. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. You can just hand that to Andy and he can pass it down the line here for our city clerk. Thanks, Lisa. Next.
Hi, it's nice to see you guys again. Thanks for being here. Amy Boring, 123 Colorado, Whitefish. I just kind of want to speak on behalf of Carter's character. He's been an open book to the community. He's been all over Facebook. He's posted his phone number. I had a chance to meet with him at great length. I have participated in the corridor planning meeting since 2017, and I think it's good. I think he's going to do good by the community. It's definitely what we need, and I believe in you guys to make that right decision. So, thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah.
David Hunt, 113 Park Knoll Lane, Mayor Malfeld and council members. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of owners of 12 lots in Park Knoll Estates as listed in our letter to the planning board that's in your packet. And again, we offer our support for the requested zoning. We still maintain high concerns regarding the WR2 zone densities, but feel that these special conditions that are applied to this application have reduced those concerns considerably and now provide a much better baseline buffer to work from. Thanks to the staff for getting these special conditions into the process as I would guess it's not been regularly used. Our support is due to the front-end steps taken by Carter to get to know us. Thank you. And the special character of our neighborhood. We've valued the open dialogue that we've had with Carter and the prompt initial actions he's taken to get these conditions into this application. We look forward to working together with Carter to create a much better outcome for a new neighborhood near us while preserving our neighborhood character to a very great degree. Thanks for your consideration, always for your service to the community.
Thanks, David. Appreciate your comments tonight. Further public testimony on this item? Michelle, how about online?
Yes, Kristen Zuckerman, if you'd like to unmute your mic, please.
Hi, good evening. Kristen Zuckerman, 157 Vista Drive. I missed Lisa when she came around door to door, so just would like to make myself resident number 29 in Great Northern Heights in support of both Carter, particularly Carter, who's been great with his outreach and willingness to work with his neighbors, and with the proposed zone change.
Thanks, Kristen. And I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion, please.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve ordinance 22.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Fury. Any comments, Frank?
I guess what I would have to say is that I hope this provides a blueprint for developers. Now, I hope this will provide a blueprint for future developers who want to come to this city and add development to our community, to solicit and invite the neighbors to help develop the area that they've lived in and that they call home is a great thing. And I compliment Carter for doing that. And with that, that's the only comments I've got.
Thank you, Frank. Further comments on the motion? Andy?
Just a couple of quick comments. First, an apology to Mr. Unger for not getting together with him, but it was kind of a bad time for me, and I think for him too, as it all worked out, so I do apologize for that. And then once your application was in, then I was kind of prohibited from doing that. David, this may be your last battle you have to fight. Am I correct in that? Or close? That is it. Okay. All right, but other than that, I do want to compliment Mr. Unger. I think he did a great job with the neighborhood, and I think he's trying to do the right thing out there. And it's not been easy with that property, as Don will tell you out there, and anybody else that's dealt with it. So, good job. Thank you.
Further comments from the council? Rebecca?
Yeah, I still have pretty big concerns about traffic in that area, and drainage. You know, JP Road is the only protected turn lane to the left going into town, and we had a hotel application that with a traffic study that showed 70% of the traffic is going into town. And so hopefully when you're designing this, you will look at that for safety, because that would mean people are crossing 5 lanes of traffic going into town. And so I wasn't real sure that this was an appropriate level of density. And the other thing I'd like to point out is on the other side of the highway, all of those homeowners and renters are turning with traffic into town. And so I don't think it's quite as risky for them to build out that area with higher density. And I'm really glad that the neighborhoods have finally found a solution for this property, because it's been in play for a number of years now. And I'm really hoping that it works out for both established neighborhoods, because the people that live there love where they live, and they don't really want to have their lifestyle ruined, you know. And so I think it's wonderful that Mr. Unger in particular has worked out positive relationships with them, and I hope that continues. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Further comments? Don and family, Carter, thanks for the very thoughtful application this evening and for working with your neighbors. I echo my fellow councilors' comments. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously, Michelle. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and recess for about 5 to 8 minutes before we launch into the remaining items on our agenda. Going to go ahead and call this meeting back to order. Just a housekeeping item. Item 6, excuse me, 6D of the agenda, which was ordinance 22-11, as with all ordinances, require a 2/3 majority of the council voting in favor for passage. Because we did not have that this evening, Frank voted in opposition. That, excuse me, it's item 6. I can't read my 6D. That item did not pass. It was the rezone for that the west portion of the property. So we'll need to, if it's the council's prerogative, to consider that or reconsider that at the next meeting, which would be on September 6th, and that would require either Ben, Rebecca, or Andy making that motion to reconsider since you voted in the affirmative. So just an FYI, that did not pass this evening. With that said, I did have the applicant's representative for the next items 6F and 6G, request the council consider postponement of all 4 items to the September 6th meeting because 3 of those 4 items do require 2/3 vote of the city council for approval. So with that said, I'd respectfully request that we provide the applicant that flexibility and postpone to the September 6th meeting if that's okay with the council. I'd take a motion to that effect.
I can move to postpone items 6F, G.
That's it.
To our next council meeting.
Which is September 6th, which is a Tuesday, given our Labor Day holiday on Monday the 5th.
Great.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Norton. Will, just want to confirm that is your desire? Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. I'm pretty sure we'll have a full house in 2 weeks, so thanks for coming tonight. Tough to get everyone here on a nice summer day.
Mr. Mayor, quick point of order. Would it be appropriate for a motion to reconsider on item D at this point? Just to place it back on the table and then postpone for vote?
Yes, I think
Okay.
that's, you want to postpone it to September 6th for a vote?
September 6th for just a vote and keep the public hearing closed?
Sure.
Okay. And that's a motion that gets no discussion, so I'll just make the motion to reconsider. Mr. Mayor, I would move to reconsider ordinance number 22-11, which is item 6D from our evening's agenda.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign.
Mr. Mayor, I would further move to move item 6D, which is our ordinance number 22-11, to our September 6th agenda. Public hearing shall remain closed. It'll be for voting purposes only.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. Thank you, Andy. And that passes unanimously, Michelle. Well, our meeting just shortened. Claire's happy. You get to go home earlier, Claire. Okay, yeah. That's great. We'll move on to item 7, communications from our city manager, Dana Smith. You have Dana's report enclosed with the packet. Any questions for Dana at this time? Dana, anything additional to report on?
I will add to the report in the packet that we are very much aware of the issues that we're facing with porta potties and septic, as the city of Columbia Falls has reduced the amount of waste that they're willing to accept from the contractors that service those pieces of whatever equipment, porta potties. So we have been in discussions with DEQ, and Craig, I'm going to let you talk about your solutions. Give an update. Yeah.
So I have been in touch with Alex, I forget Alex's last name, from Papa Squat. We've been aware of the situation for about 6 weeks, that Columbia Falls was in the process of reducing the amount of portable toilet waste that they can take at their wastewater plant. And so been trying to come up with a plan in order to stay ahead of this, but had some difficulty getting some confirmation back from DEQ. But I do have that now, confirmation from DEQ that we are permitted to accept the waste, and I'm going to be working with Alex Crichton, is his last name, tomorrow to accept some of the waste at a few different locations around town to see which is most suitable. So the goal at this point is to keep the party on this weekend with the Hootenanny and Brewfest, and I think we can make that happen. So we've made quite a bit of progress in the last week or so.
How does accepting that waste affect our treatment plant, if at all, given the chemicals that are contained in those containers?
Yeah, you know, it's not the chemicals so much as it is just the strength of the waste, the biological oxygen demand and the solids that come with this type of waste. It's just deemed as a much higher strength waste. And so DEQ essentially allows cities and towns with mechanical wastewater treatment systems to make the ruling on their own, to go through the calculations and the determination as to whether or not they can process it through the plant. You know, had we still been working on our old lagoon systems, it wouldn't be permissible, but now that we are up and running with the new wastewater plant, it is something that I think we can accept. Really, you know, in round numbers, we're talking about a couple thousand gallons of waste a week during the busy summer months, and then it cuts way back, you know, between Labor Day and Memorial Day. So with a plant like Whitefish that averages about 1 million gallons a day, a couple thousand gallons a week of this waste isn't going to be a problem. But what we need to do is find a place upstream where we can process it so that we can dilute, you know, the strength of the waste and the chemicals that are in those porta potties.
Okay, thanks. Frank?
Craig, are we talking about accepting waste from porta potties just within the city of Whitefish?
Correct.
Thank you.
Ben?
Just to elaborate on that, are you talking about for this weekend or for right now, or are we making a more permanent arrangement here?
We'll be making a more permanent arrangement. My goal is to get something in place this week so that we're set up for the special events this weekend and for the remainder of the summer. But there will likely be a rate structure coming before you guys that we're going to have to approve to manage this long term.
It's not just this one company that's going to be wanting to do this, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I turned off my mic. There's a lot more discussions on, you know, that we have to determine the amount of flow that we can actually accept because, you know, right now it might just be overage, but as Columbia Falls ratchets down, if they're reducing acceptance more so, it could be that we're faced with having to accept more waste. And so I think there's a lot more work to be done, and I'm sure we'll have a work session on it in the future. Really, the direction to Craig was like, fix it for the special events that just had all of their porta potties pulled, because those events have been long-standing community events, including Oktoberfest that will be coming up too. So a lot of alcohol consumption needs those porta potties nearby. So that's a good update. Thank you, Craig. Other than that, we had our...
Can I just ask one more question?
Yes, go ahead.
Craig, so you said we have to figure out something upstream, so I assume that we don't take the tank stuff like at the plant, it has to go in somewhere.
Correct,
up
yeah.
the stream so it mixes off enough by the time it gets to the plant that,
Yep,
you know.
exactly. Yeah, we're looking at a couple of different lift stations that have significant wet well volumes where we can meter the waste into the collection system at an acceptable rate. So there's a couple of locations that'll work.
I was assuming it didn't mean like upstream in the river.
In the river.
Scoop it out when it comes by or...
Correct.
Rebecca, did you have any questions?
Oh, I just was worried it wasn't going to be my neighborhood. So I didn't know how this worked because I was like, wow, that would be a lot of porta potties in one neighborhood. But I trust that you know what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. We'll move on to our review and adoption of the FY 23 through 27 CIP. Dana.
All right, good evening again. So the capital improvements program, we have, slightly reviewed really during our budget workshops. But what we have done is we have updated fiscal year '23 to reflect all of the projects that were just approved in the FY '23 budget. For fiscal year '24 through '27, those are our projects that we hope to complete, but of course, depending on the economy, it is a flexible plan. This is one that really is just meant for planning purposes. It is not an appropriation of funds or an approval of a specific project necessarily, but more a planning document. And so within the capital improvement plan, we do have about $41.6 million worth of projects identified, from fleet replacement to, street projects, water and wastewater projects, parks projects, bike and pedestrian projects. So a lot of different projects within here. Again, it's a very flexible plan, and this has really been worked on with directors to be a more fundable plan. There are some projects that are identified as yet to be determined because of funding, but also some are because of just not knowing the timing of the projects necessarily, even 5 years out. So with that, if you have any questions on the capital improvement plan, I'm happy to answer them now.
Thanks, Dana. Any questions for Dana on the CIP? Not seeing any, we do need a motion to adopt the document.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to adopt the fiscal year '23 through '27 capital improvement plan.
Is there a second to the motion? Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that motion passes unanimously, which brings us on to item 7D, consideration of the request from Yoga Hive Montana to sublet a portion of the retail space to Full Send Physio LLC in accordance with the recently approved commercial lease. Dana.
Good evening. My staff report is on page 671 of the packet. And I will just bring your attention to the letter from Shell, who is the owner of Yoga Hive Montana, on page 673. But back on July 18th, the City Council approved the commercial lease between Yoga Hive Montana and the city for both the east and west side of the retail spaces in our parking structure. That 5-year lease began on August 1st, and it includes approximately 2,800 square feet, and the lease rent is $5,950 per month. In the lease that was approved, it does have a section that references assignment and subletting, in that the tenant will not assign their interest in this commercial lease or sublet any portion without prior written consent of the landlord. The letter within the packet is from Shell that describes her requesting the ability to sublease a portion of the facility to Full Send Physio. And within that sublease that she's proposed, I've also included in the packet the proposed sublease. Full Send Physio would maintain liability insurance that covers the city as an additional insured at the $1.5 million limits as already required of Yoga Hive Montana. It also requires compliance with our lease. And the sublease actually covers the west side. There is a back kind of separated room as an office, as well as shared use of where the cycle studio used to be. So it includes most of, I would say, that west side, except that area that is really kind of that shared space is probably the largest section. So the plan for her is to have this be a 24-month term. I know that these individual, what she shared with me is this new company has separated off from another physical therapy company in town and is really trying to get started. And so it's a 24-month lease with $2,300 a month. This is financially, we would not be collecting any of those funds, but we did increase the revenue generated from the lease for the full facility to $71,400 per year. And really, this is at the council's discretion. I think that it's a good use of this space personally, but I also understand that a sublease is often a challenging one because this does appear that the funds are going into our tenants' pockets, but I think combined, the use of that facility makes sense in that it is all around wellness and health. So with that, I respectfully recommend that you consider the sublease, and if approved, direct myself to draft a letter of written consent to proceed with that proposed sublease.
Thanks, Dana. Council? I guess showing of hands if you support that. Or Frank, did you have questions?
Dana, I haven't done the calculation. Is the lease rate for the space that's being leased higher for the subtenant than it is for the actual tenant?
So,
Or is it the same, in essence?
yeah, so, you know, if you consider that they're getting to use that shared space, I think they get the daytime business hours, Monday through Friday, so say that's for their business full-time use, plus that back office. You know, I haven't run that calculation, but it's hard to tell with the 5,950 because that also included a lower rate for the lease she already had for the Yoga Hive side.
Right.
So let me calculate that. I could probably at least see what we're at here.
What I'm looking at is I would be uncomfortable with the subtenant giving the tenant what I'll call a windfall.
Right. Oh my gosh, my computer. I can't do that in my head. I could have done that in my head. Oh my goodness, sorry. It's hard to say because wait, no, it's not how you do that. 616. So it's hard, I mean, so I have to try to consider the common space for the restrooms in that calculation, but it would potentially be a higher rate if I don't include the restroom areas, but they would be shared space. And that's if I've calculated that accurately.
You could include, I mean, shared space should be included because
Yeah.
tenant is paying for all of that. What I'm looking for is
How
every,
much the bathroom space. Let me see if I can get to my file. Sorry, I should have done this beforehand. My apologies. Let's see. The map. Oh, it's going to be in Silva Cycles. So if I look at Silva Cycle was, I'm going to be able to figure out that part of it.
Dan, I don't want to put you on the
Yeah,
spot.
we might.
Here's what I propose. I propose that I would approve or recommend that you sign a lease, but the lease shall not, the sublease shall not charge in excess to the subtenant what the tenant is paying for that equivalent of space. That's what I would be comfortable with. Per square foot.
And can we clarify if it's the rate for so when we calculated the $5,950, we escalated the original lease that she had that had still many years for the term, and then that was escalated at like a CPI, but then the other one on the west side, which is what this covers, was at a higher rate because of market. So is that what we're wanting to look at, that $30 a square foot? versus like her other side that she already had leased. Because if we take the 5,950, it's like $25 a square foot, which is significantly less than what we actually leased out the Sobacycle section to
Right.
her. So I would say, to be fair, because really her lease changed because of the Sobacycle side.
Right.
That's the square foot rate that we would look at.
Sure.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm clear on that. Okay.
Can you repeat the motion, Frank?
I would move to recommend that the city manager execute the lease or allow for the sublease so long as the subtenant is not charged in excess of the excess of what the tenant is paying within 5% for that space that we're subleasing.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Counselor Norton.
Did I confuse you, Andy?
No, I just have a comment on that, because I think it's cumbersome at best. Because there's a number of things, I just looking through the lease, the lessee is not paying utilities, for example.
Okay.
They're splitting internet costs. How do you calculate shared space use percentage-wise? Who's buying the toilet paper? Who buys the toilet cleaner? I mean, there's a lot of, the landlord is gonna be providing things that they're not gonna pay for that are presumably included in that, which would then infer that they're gonna pay a little bit higher dollar per square foot possibly than what the primary leaseholder would be. So that would be my only. But I see where you're going with it, and I guess maybe that's just a conversation Dana can have with Shelley rather than giving her a motion and just say, we think it's fair that this is the way it works out as best as possible. I mean,
yeah,
is that easier?
I'm not trying to, what I'm worried about is I don't want us to be in a situation where our tenant takes and subleases this space at twice the cost that they're incurring. It's just like not right. And so within a ballpark, I'm okay with that. But that's what my motion would entail.
And I'm in agreement with that. Yeah, I think it's hard to go price per foot price.
I think you're,
that's my
good
caveat.
criticism, and I think that's good. Would that work for you in terms of direction?
I think so, yes.
Council comfortable with that?
All those in favor of the motion? And that's unanimous. Michelle. Thanks, Dana. We'll move on to item 8, communications, and we'll start with item A, consideration of joining the amicus brief in the 303 Creative LLC case. Angie.
Plaintiff named 303 Creative. The case involves a woman who commercially provides website designs and graphics. Colorado has a non-discrimination ordinance which basically bars discrimination on the basis of several bases, including sexual orientation and gender identity. The plaintiff decided she will create websites for different sex individuals, but she will not do it for same-sex couples based on her religious convictions. And it was challenged, basically, Colorado's NDO on the basis that her right to free speech includes the right to deny clients basically includes the right to deny clients her services based on her religious beliefs. This is commercial speech, just so you know. It's considered commercial speech when you're soliciting people for money. The primary reason I think we were asked to join in the amicus brief is because the brief specifically references the City of Whitefish's non-discrimination ordinance. It references several other ones too, but the city attorney for San Francisco brought to my attention that our ordinance is specifically called out. By joining the amicus brief, basically, we just sign it. In fact, they have the attorney, the city attorney, she's having the city attorney for cities that are joining it sign. I don't really see necessarily any downside, and I think, again, it bears your consideration simply because our non-discrimination ordinance is specifically referenced.
Ben?
I would like to briefly speak in favor of us joining this brief. I'm generally hesitant to be involved in federal issues, and I think I'm just very thankful every day that the politics here are not the federal politics, and they're not anything like it here. And so, with that said, this feels like a special case to me. You know, we have a non-discrimination ordinance that was passed here by this council years ago. I'm very glad that we did, and I think a lot of the citizens that benefit from not being discriminated against also appreciate it. And I think that it is one of our jobs, to the extent we can help prevent discrimination in our town, it's one of our jobs up here to do it. Whether this will change the outcome of the Supreme Court case, I don't know, but I think it does extensively reference our ordinance here, and I think we should support it. And therefore, I would put my vote in favor of joining this amicus brief.
Others?
Very much in favor.
Andy?
Yeah, I'm very much in favor, and because I can't say it as well as Ben did, I'm just going to say I agree with Ben.
And Frank?
I couldn't agree more. I think we were a leader in this state in many ways with this ordinance. It's one of, quite frankly, my proudest things that I've done up here on this dais, or to work that problem. I would be pleased if we would sign it.
There you go, Ange. Thank you. And item 8B, we have a letter from FCD recommending we reappoint John Ellis to the Board of Supervisors through the term ending 12/31/2022, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Michelle? That there's currently 2 vacancies because LEC also stepped down, so I believe they're still advertising for the second vacancy for the urban representative.
Yeah, I think what we're doing, we're reappointing John Ellis for his next term, which right now it ends December 31st of '22. So I think it's another 2 or 3 year term.
Okay.
But what we also need to do is find somebody to fill Lex's position until his term is up at the end of December. So he's dropped off completely.
Is that our responsibility to fill that vacancy?
So I think that's what they're asking. I do have it advertised, but I haven't had any letters of interest. So I think they're asking for somebody from the council or from staff to fill that position until we find somebody for that position.
Okay, yeah, the letter was somewhat confusing.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how my interpretation of it
Okay.
is.
Is there anyone on staff willing to assume that position for the next 4 months or until the position's filled? I certainly can as a mayor, just have a conflict of interest given I work with them through my business. Angie? Really? Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Angie, the only thing I would caution you is you need to tell us if this becomes more time than you can spare.
Okay.
And provide, and I'm dead serious about that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And then let's see if we can find somebody pretty quickly.
Thanks, Ange. It's unfortunate Lex stepped down. He was a pretty valuable contributor to that board, given his background. I think we've addressed item 8C, Craig, sufficiently, so we can move to councilor comments, and maybe tonight we'll start with Andy.
Good choice, I have nothing.
Thanks, Andy. Rebecca?
Yeah, I just have a question for Dana about the bear proofing plan, because my neighbors who are very ingenious are figuring out how to attach lines and stuff to our our containers, so the bear doesn't tip it over every night. So now they're figuring out their own problem. So I'm just wondering, could you explain to the public what the plan for rollout is and where?
Yeah, so we are excited to starting the rollout later this month, early September. We will be getting more information out to the public here soon. There's a postcard flyer prepared that will also help with the change out. But effectively what the city has done, working with Republic and FWP, was divide the city into 4 quadrants, north of the viaduct and east and west of Baker Avenue. And so we have, and Wisconsin. And so we have the northwest portion of the city starting first, along the beach where we see a lot of bear activity. We know that in your area, Rebecca, we are having bear activity, and we've contemplated talking to staff if maybe there aren't a few streets that we know of with high bear activity, say near Richard Hildner's home, and then Scott Avenue, that maybe we do want to test those out with the first rollout. But just for ease of communication to the public and for our billing department, it was much easier to come up with kind of set areas that we could roll out. So it will go north, northwest, southwest, southeast, and then northeast. And we're going to do those kind of in 4 different sections. It will about a month in between each of them, but we hope to have everything rolled out, by the end of November. And the reason we put the southeast portion third before the northeast is because that's where a lot of our alleys are, and we want them to be able to hopefully work with their containers in the alleys, the 300 gallons to the 96 gallons, and prepare for the snow to fly so that they have some practice before that happens. Because north of the viaduct, on the east side, we have far fewer shared containers. Most people have their own individual rollouts already.
Thank you.
Yep.
No other comments. Thank you.
Thanks. Ben?
No comments, thank you.
And Frank?
No further comment this evening. Thank you.
I just have one. There is a development, and I'm going to have Dave weigh in here, that was brought to my attention south of Whitefish. As you know, we've in the past commented or provided comments to Flathead County on projects that were formerly within our zoning jurisdiction, extraterritorial zoning district, or within 4 miles of our borders. This project is just outside of the 4-mile mark. It's just north of the county landfill, and it involves 73 RV park slots plus 268 commercial and residential housing units, all of which would be ingressing and egressing on 93 South, and all being on septic. And I believe this went to the planning board in early June, and it was postponed because the room was essentially filled and the line went all the way out the door to the street, apparently. So I believe it goes now in front of the planning board on September 7th, and I asked Dave to look into the application to see if he shared some of the concerns that have been shared with me that I certainly agree with in terms of the septic, the density, the safety, the transportation, the impact it would have on that corridor. And I just would like to get Dave to weigh in at this point, but what I'm asking the council tonight is if you would support Dave reviewing this in some detail and drafting a letter that we would sign, I can sign, Dave can sign, to share with the county the city's concerns related to this development application. So with that said, I just want Dave to maybe provide some little bit more information than I do.
Yeah, and so, we have an agreement with the county that they notify us, anything in the old planning jurisdiction. They didn't notify us of this, so we weren't aware of it. But after looking at the materials today, there's definitely, it's gonna impact Highway 93 South and the traffic on there. The fact that, they wanna zone it to 1-acre lots, which is the smallest you can get, and still put a septic on there. That's kind of concerning overall, this valley. We also have, 100,000 people that live here, or more than that, and 60 to 65% of them are all on septics. They're not in urban areas, and so that's a valley-wide concern that needs to be addressed as we continue to grow as a valley. But yeah, certainly, we can weigh in that we have some concerns about that dense of a development not being on urban services and in an area that's going to create additional traffic issues on the Happy Valley area.
Thoughts from the council? Supportive in general? And I think we can work on a letter together and then circulate it to the council for approval, and then we'll get it out the door.
So a letter to the county or a letter to the editor? What are you saying?
To the county.
The county, that's what,
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely. Yep. So again, I think that next public hearing is on September 7th, Dave. So if we could get that out here in the next 4 or 5 days, that'd be great. Sorry to bring it to your attention so late. I thought it might have been on your radar, but evidently we weren't noticed. So I appreciate that. And I have nothing further. Dana?
One item. Just to make you guys aware, the Stars and Stripes National Museum and Library will be recognizing the city of Whitefish, along with a number of other cities around the nation, for our embrace of informed citizenship, commitment, and service. They're asking to do the presentation this Thursday. I don't know, Frank, if you are available or if any other counselor would like to attend. I will be here, so I'd be happy to accept whatever recognition that they're trying to bestow upon us that day. They are a nonprofit out of Missouri focused on the Stars and Stripes, which is the military newspaper.
The answer to your question is I'm not in town. I'm leaving, and so I wish I could, but I can't, so I won't.
Okay.
I won't be here either, Dana, and I responded to them as well.
Okay.
So, anyone interested in attending or?
Between 1:30 and 2:30, but I haven't confirmed an exact time. He just called me again today. Here on Thursday. Okay.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dana.
Great.
Anything further from council? Just a reminder, our next meeting is Tuesday, September 6th. On that note, we are adjourned.